Sorry, I actually think that's your slide, Nicola, just to get us off on the right foot.
That's quite all right.
Thank
Over
you.
to Nicola.
Hi everyone, nice to be here. So this research is really from the EEF evidence review of approaches to writing, and Graham and colleagues have proposed a set of conclusions really about what is known about effective writing strategies, which are summarised on this slide. So really creating an environment where children and young people are motivated to express themselves, not fearful about making mistakes, and where writing is celebrated and tasks are appropriate to learners' interests and needs. We'll say more about writing as a process throughout this webinar, so I won't say much more about that. And not surprisingly, the one about creating routines that ensure learners write frequently is that when students or pupils write more, then they write better. And it's especially important to give children and young people lots of different opportunities to write different texts for different purposes and audiences. And finally, we know that setting high but realistic expectations for what students are to achieve is an important motivator for pupils, and providing frequent feedback enables them to know what success looks like.
Okay, so one of the things that we hope this session does is just to signpost a more equitable approach to teaching writing. So one way that can be achieved is by teaching new vocabulary at the start of a new topic or unit, just to level that knowledge playing field between pupils. We can also do that through providing a variety of stimuli for writing where pupils maybe have a poverty of experience in comparison to their peers. So giving them that wee bit of a trigger, just something that's going to give them that idea, that jumping off point for the writing that they're about to undertake. I think another way we can try to be more equitable in our approach to writing is we try to look at things in terms of assets. If we value the skills and knowledge and connections that learners bring from their own households and experiences, I think that's an approach that would really stand us in good stead. And I think finally, on the note of equity, creating those opportunities for listening and talking, giving learners access to ideas and experiences of other people just to enrich their own writing. Next slide, please, Helen.
As you know, it's important to plan for differentiation and think about what learning, teaching or assessment might need to be adapted at different stages of the writing process. And Tomlinson offers 4 different aspects to think about. Content, so we consider the experiences and interests of your learners and how you might adapt the content. For process, you might consider how you might use or remove writing scaffolds, chunk up the learning, use visual prompts, or provide further dialogue and discussion to support or challenge learners. When we think about the product, you're considering how you can provide breadth, depth and application of learning. For example, if the purpose of writing is to persuade, the product might be a letter, a poster or an advert, for instance. And finally, you consider your learning environment. So how can you provide opportunities to work with peers or the teacher or independently, building that community of learners. If we move on to the next slide, this gives a few practical ideas for differentiation of the content, process, product and the learning environment. And we'd welcome you to post in the chat any other ideas that you have for differentiating writing and that process of writing.
Cheers. Okay, so one of the things I thought it was just really important to kind of consider before we go into the kind of writing process itself is the sort of popularity just now, I suppose, of things like text type, genre. Obviously kind of aware that they're out there. There's a number of programs, number of kind of approaches to writing that adopt them. But whether it's, I mean, CFE has purposes for writing, senior phase has 2 kind of types of writing if you want to kind of get into it that way. But I think that no matter whether we're dealing with 6 or dealing with 9, it's probably important to kind of realise that some of these types of writing lead into each other. So for example, the skills that are required for recount, that might develop into personal writing, creative writing, informative writing. I think it's also kind of good to pick up on the fact that some types of writing, some text types or genre really need more teaching around about them than others. And I think when we're talking about this tonight in terms of second and third level, but I think by the time you get to second, it's okay to leave recount behind. It's okay to kind of think about instructional in terms of something that you're not really necessarily going to see a great deal of difference between the end product at second level and even the end product at fourth level. What are the differences between a second and fourth level piece of instructional writing? So I think it's okay as time goes on to then sort of maybe give a little bit more time to different text types that you think require more input and more teaching. I think ultimately real writing, effective writing, more importantly, borrows from everywhere. You'll see creative flair in persuasive pieces, and something like that can really strengthen an argument. So at the end of the day, I think the goal is really just to have a good piece of writing. And that's what we're looking for. There's not any kind of hard and fast rules about it's got to stick to that genre, it's got to stick to the markers for that text type. A good piece of writing is obviously the ultimate end goal. So one of the things I kind of hope that you take away from today is that we try to position writing as a process rather than as a task to be completed. We'll go into these stages in much more detail in a few minutes, but just to kind of give a bit of an overview to begin with, stage one, we're talking about getting ready to write, and that really involves a lot of front-loading, planning, preparation, dialogue, conversation with the teacher and each other, really kind of teasing out every little bit of knowledge, little bit of expertise and experience that pupils have that they can maybe filter through into their writing. Stage two, we're talking about having specific protected time for writing where they're focused and not necessarily silent, but they've got that focused time for writing where pupils are using their own notes and ideas to work towards producing a product. Third stage, we're talking about feedback. We want to build in opportunities for self-editing and for peer and teacher-led feedback. And at stage four, when you decide that the chunk of writing or the piece of writing has been completed, choose what to redraft or publish or display, and include the learner in that decision as well. What do they feel is their best work? What do they value from the work that they've completed? Next slide, please, Helen. Okay, so stage one, and I mentioned this earlier when I was talking, it really is kind of heavily front-loaded. There's an awful lot going on in this first section. So getting ready to write, really there has to be a clear purpose. Pupils should know what they're writing about, what the purpose is. The purpose is usually inherent in the genre or the text type that they're writing about, but not always, and it doesn't hurt just to clarify that at the beginning. I think that we need to take advantage of any opportunities for listening and talking that crop up. I think that's something that's really, really useful in increasing access to ideas and experiences that individual learners may not have. And that opportunity to engage in dialogue, either with their teacher or with a peer, is only going to add to that. I used the word enrich earlier on, and I think that really sums it up quite well. That chance to talk to other people really gives them the chance to enrich the writing that they'll produce. I really like the idea of using aspirational models of the genre that you're teaching. I think about creative and horror writing that I've taught in the past, and using Dracula as an example and having them tear it apart to figure out where Bram Stoker's meeting his success criteria. I think something like that is really quite powerful. Looking at real writing and saying, right, well, where does that hit the mark? And finally, I think modelling. Really, really important, but both at the planning side of things and on the writing side of things. I think learners need to see your thought process. They need to see the struggle that you go through when you're coming up with ideas. They need to see you changing your mind and swapping words and scoring things out. And that's not always comfortable for us to do. It's not always something that we kind of feel is natural. You don't want to show kids you making mistakes, I guess. But at the end of the day, I think that's quite powerful. I think they take quite a lot from that. I think the biggest barrier sometimes is putting ideas down in paper for fear of being wrong. But seeing teachers going through that same process, I think, is an extremely valuable part of getting ready to write.
So at the getting ready to write stage, as David was saying, we want to really inspire children to write, to help them form their ideas and to think about the language to communicate these. And this can really come from one of the 4 contexts for learning, and I've given some examples of that on this slide. So it might draw from an experience, such as an educational visit or a visitor. Children will also draw from their own experiences, so if they're into sports or clubs or they've been to the theatre, places that they've been, films that they've watched, computer games that they've played. These are all experiences that our young people can draw from. Children may also be researching a particular topic for health and well-being or social subjects or science, for example, or they may have their own interest in, for example, fishing, or so they have that content knowledge from their own interests. As David said, good quality texts are really good inspiration and stimulus for writing. Picture books, novels, poems, and fiction texts can be used as a frame for writing, providing that model, such as create another story set in the same world, or as an inspiration to create a new text, for example, an interview with a character for an online magazine, for example. Drama and play can also be a powerful tool to help children explore a character or scene before they write. And this can be a reservoir of ideas and language to draw upon that comes from that imagined experience. Children's drawings is a really good strategy. Starting with children's own drawings can provide children with a frame for writing. So rather than starting with a blank page, drawings tell the story and can be a really useful way in for writing, for reluctant writers who won't be hindered by the spelling, the handwriting, the grammar, so on. And on the next slide, there are a few more practical ideas as well. So using films or images can be really supportive for children, especially in descriptive writing. So there's a couple of websites listed here, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and which can provide a variety of different picture prompts, which give children the image from which they can draw upon, either for ideas to write about a character, a setting, or to create some dialogue. Spoken language rehearsal is really helpful, as David has already said, those opportunities to rehearse the language they will use in writing through listening and talking activities. So you might ask children to retell a text, whether that be fiction or non-fiction, so that they can internalise those language structures needed. Or you might set up a talking task with, for example, sentence stems for agreeing or disagreeing about a topic before asking them to write an argument, for example. And then graphic organisers, again, this one here is for conveying information in a report, and that can be a really useful visual to exemplify the structure of a text type, and also a very useful note-taking tool.
Just before we go in, because that's been a 20-minute spell of us kind of talking all about that. So are there any questions in the chat, any points that anyone wants to make before we press on just about what we've heard so far? As I said at the beginning, this is, most of the kind of work that we're talking about tonight has gone into that section. We're mostly talking about that getting ready to write section, being front loaded with lots of planning and preparation. If anyone has anything they want to ask about that, do they want to pop it in the chat just now? Or will we press on?
Well, while we allow maybe a couple of moments for colleagues to have a think about that and reflect, I could see a couple of comments in the chat, David. There's one from Mr. Stevenson, and he was reflecting on a point you made quite early on. I don't know if Mr. Stevenson wants to unmute and just come in on that.
I'm here, Helen. I was kind of agreeing with something you said, David, about, I suppose, a lot of the, I'm over in West Lothian, and a lot of our approaches are quite kind of genre based, I suppose, to the teaching of writing. But I just liked what you were saying about a lot of good writing pieces are kind of hybrids, really, of different genres, aren't they? And all that kind of overlap, and nice for us to kind of make space for a bit more individuality, I suppose, in what kids actually produce. So no, I was just agreeing with you. I'm really enjoying this so far.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the example that always kind of comes to mind for me is science. Like a proper piece of writing in science is, you've got explanatory, you've got informative, you've got procedural writing, all kind of being used separately within like that one science report. But even beyond that, it's like you say, I think you've got, I always think about a really, really good personal piece involves elements of creative writing, because it's that skill with creative writing that kind of makes the point or kind of highlights the issue that little bit more effectively than just the kind of flat genre that we're teaching as part of that, the flat genre markers that we're teaching as part of that text type. So yeah, absolutely. I think a good piece of writing, it bleeds into each other. You beg, borrow and steal from absolutely everywhere. And I think we need to be confident enough to do that. I think we need to be comfortable enough to do that. So absolutely.
Nice one.
Can I just pick up on a couple of questions there that are in the chat as well around the planning process? I was just thinking, for those those children that are frustrated about the planning process, even having that opportunity to talk about what they want to write about is a really useful part of the planning process. You don't need to record it, you don't need to write it. If those children are just wanting to get on with writing, I think of equal value is just sharing their ideas with a partner. That can be their initial planning, if you like, of the writing. I don't know if you've got any other ideas, David, there.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that kind of, sometimes it comes down to you knowing your class, doesn't it? I mean, I can think myself of standing there thinking I've delivered an absolutely blinding writing lesson, and then you kind of ask the class about it and they tell you how terrible it was because you've done all that modelling stuff before, so why are you doing it with us again and again and again and again? And I think you need to know, like, the needs of the class in front of you. Sometimes it probably will be okay to plough ahead. I think the planning process is important though, and I think it gives I always sort of frame it as it's that additional chance to process your ideas. So if you just go straight in and write, then you've processed that idea once. If you plan that idea and you kind of go through it and you select and reject, which is part of the process as well, then that's you just getting that chance to kind of just sort of refine that idea as you go. And the more you do it, the better it gets. So I view planning as being an opportunity to do that. But I do agree there are times when, we do get bogged down in it, and there are aspects of it that you think this is becoming repetitive, do I need to go through that stage again? What I would say is that you know your class is best. You know what they need, you know what they don't need, and I think that's probably the best way to judge it. Is there anything else, or do you think we should press on? We do have a wee bit of time built in for discussion at the end, so if anyone wants to just have a bit of time to think about it and then come back to it at the end, then we can do that.
Yeah. It's great to see all these comments in, and what I'll do is maybe just keep an eye on it, David, and as I say, when we revisit at the end, we can maybe highlight a couple of themes.
Thank you. Okay, so the second stage of the writing process, we're thinking about time for writing. And I think a lot of that is about establishing a clear routine around about writing so that pupils know about the focus required during writing time, not least to try to help them build up that writing stamina. I think that's something that, we hear quite a lot about people talking about pupils don't really have that ability to write for kind of sustained arguments or sustained pieces. And this is having that specific time and increasing that specific time as time goes on is something that can be quite effective in doing that. I think time for writing is your first opportunity as a class teacher for intervention and support. As I said earlier on, you know your class, you know who's going to maybe require that extra little bit of support to get started. I think that having them working from their plans and notes, making use of what they've just done in that getting ready to write phase. If they're stuck on their plan, then maybe some peer discussion or teacher-led discussion with you is their first port of call, and not, having them not afraid to go back and revise those plans if necessary. If they start to write and something doesn't make sense, go back to the plan, have another look at it, but use all that hard work, use those notes that you've been making in the first phase. You sometimes, and it's infuriating to see, but you sometimes see kids treat it like two separate tasks. So I've got my planning that I'm going to do over here, and then my writing that I'm going to do over here, and I'm never going to look at that while I'm doing that. And you've got to kind of try and make sure that they see how the two feed into each other. I would also talk about maybe having success criteria and models of good practice readily available for reference. It's not a memory test. We're asking them to learn a skill and implement it in their own work. And that takes time. So it's about giving them all the tools that they need to do that.
So this slide is just to focus on that shared writing approach where the teacher is modelling the writing process with the class, thinking out loud about the decisions a writer will make about word choice or sequence in the text, rereading the text or changing mistakes, sorting out omissions. And as we've said already, it's really important that learners see this in action. And it can be used as a way of gathering pupil ideas and word choice and having a discussion around how you make decisions around that. And so it's a really valuable approach to sharing the learning with children.
I've just noticed a comment in the chat. I think it's from Miss Gourley. So I'm hoping that what we're about to talk about here maybe addresses some of what you've mentioned in that comment there. But that's really interesting. So, feedback. I think that the most effective form of feedback is delivered as soon as possible after writing's taken place. It should provide more opportunities for discussion. If possible, read aloud to the teacher or a peer if that's something that they're comfortable with, and ask your group for advice. I also think that good examples of writing can be shared with the whole class, like for example using a visualiser, and I think it's really good to get the class to identify where that particular piece meets success criteria, where it could improve. I think that we talk about that community of writers, and I think that's a really good example of that, really quite powerful. And I always just go along this idea of the fact that, if kids can spot good practice in other people's work, then they can apply it to their own. And that's a good way of checking that that's something that's happening. I also think feedback should focus on strengths as well as next steps and should relate to the success criteria that have been set. That was the focus of the lesson, so that should be the focus of the feedback. And then finally, I just think it is good practice for feedback to originate from a different voice for each chunk of writing. So you get that chance for self, peer and teacher-led feedback at least once within each piece of writing. Again, just kind of anecdotally, the way I used to split my class into three big groups of 10. I think it's really helpful for teacher workload as well when you're only dealing with a one group of 10 at a time. It means everybody gets the chance to speak to you, to have teacher feedback within the one piece of writing, and splitting up into those kind of, even if it's just a very kind of arbitrary beginning, middle and end of a piece, I think that just gives them the chance to independently improve their work, improve their peers' work, and also work with the teacher.
So just picking up on the feedback, this is one useful strategy to provide children and young people a structure to edit their writing. It can be really overwhelming for a young person or a child to go through their first draft and be told to proofread or edit it. But this way gives simple, short, focused opportunities to edit on specific criteria that will help pupils internalise that process of editing. And this can be done in a classroom as a carousel activity where different groups move to different stations with visual prompts for peer or self-editing. Or it can also be carried out, say, as a timed activity. So you may have 3 minutes or so to do that self or peer edit with a specific lens or focus. And these can take the form of a particular focus, such as those suggested on the slide, or can focus on the success criteria, obviously related to the task. This allows the teacher that time to focus on individuals or groups of children for that really high quality real-time feedback. The learner can then act on that feedback if appropriate at that time, or it can feed forward into their next draft or their next writing task. So it's just a really practical way of organising that feedback, just as David also described the way he managed his groups of children and making sure that you're given that high quality of feedback.
And again, I'll just reiterate, Nicola, but when we were putting this webinar together, I thought that this editing stations thing that Nicola had come up with was one of the real takeaway, one of the real practical takeaways from it. If I was going back to a class tomorrow, or if I was looking to implement something regarding writing, I would do something like this because I think it's really slick, really well put together. I also think that if you can get kids into the habit of working in that way, you can adapt this to use it for, you can use this for your success criteria as well. They can be using those stations or placemats or carousels to do that same thing there. So yeah, I think in terms of takeaways from this, that's a really, really useful one. Okay, so I'm going to just really quickly address tools for writing because it's one of the things that we kind of bounce about quite a lot, and I don't think there's any kind of difficulty in admitting that it's something we bounce about quite a lot between each other as well. How much, what's the level of importance that we give to them? How much of an impact do they have on your assessment of a piece of writing, or all sorts of conversations around about it. But I think we kind of arrived at the following ideas round about tools for writing. I think absolutely they are important. They 100%, they're important to help communicate meaning. But I also think that we have to value and develop quality of ideas. They can't be the main consideration for assessment. There's got to be something other than that. We also have to allow pupils the chance to develop their ideas rather than providing all of the content, which means that tools for writing cannot be the only independent aspect of writing that learners produce. It's not a jigsaw puzzle. It's got, that they just kind of knit together and then we kind of assess what would be a kind of minor aspect of it. So it should also be about, writing itself should also be about that quality of ideas, that chance to exchange information, have dialogue with people, tap into resources that other kids have got, that the teachers got, and then bring them to your own work. And I think that, you know, that is just as, if not more important than what we would offer in terms of tools for writing. I think that, you know, a way to frame it is to consider that it's okay to be accurate enough. I think we're looking for meaning at first reading. That's the phrase that always kind of sticks with me. And I know that kind of originates in senior phase, but I think it's quite a good description of that. It's not perfect. It's not 100% accurate all the time, but it's about getting the message across. And I think if writing conveys its meaning the first time you read it, that's a really strong goal to aim for. That would be a really good target. I think we like tools for writing. I think they're measurable. I think we think that they help us pin down levels sometimes, but I think there has to be more to it than that, especially at second level and beyond. And while they've got an ongoing, ever-present importance in any piece of writing, I don't think they can be that central focus all the time. Okay, so final stage of the writing process itself, when we're talking about improvement and celebrating success. And that improvement has to be about not just accuracy, but also about the quality of ideas. It should be about improving character, improving setting, developing the strength of an argument, including an additional step in a process, as well as the technical accuracy of paragraph and spell and punctuation being improved. I think that it should also be formative as well as summative. I think improvement can occur throughout a piece of writing as well as at the end. Advice from feedback in one chunk can and should be carried on to the next chunk of writing if that's how you're approaching it. And finally, I think truly valuing learners' experiences in home literacy practices would mean that we also allow them a stake in choosing what they redraft, what's important to them. They should get to choose what we edit and publish.
This slide is really just around giving you some ideas for sharing that writing. So if we view writing as communication, it's important that children and young people have opportunities to share that writing. And these are just a few ideas to think about. And again, we would really welcome if you have other ideas, please post them in the chat. Remember to think about the range of digital texts as well as publishing sort of physical copies. That's a really important aspect of sharing that more widely and celebrating the success of writing as well.
Okay, so that's every aspect of the writing process, and I think there are a number of questions that have cropped up in the chat through that. So I think now would be a good point maybe to just take them as part of a discussion. Anything there that's caught anybody's eye, ES colleagues?
David, there are a few themes, I think, coming through. I mean, first of all, just thank colleagues for their participating so enthusiastically and bringing so many ideas to the table in this. So one theme I've picked up on is about the listening and talking aspect of writing. And I think it was it Mr. McAllister possibly talking a bit further up? Apologies if it wasn't you, Mr. McAllister. I know you've put a few things in.
Yeah, that was me.
The best writing lessons I've taught are just as much discussion as writing. Do you want to say a bit more?
Yeah, okay. I like the visual sort of pie chart you had, and it split it into 3 parts, because a lot of teachers think that writing lessons are you turn your lights out, put some classical music on, give them an hour and a half, and they go and write a story about a flying tree or something. Yeah. And the reality is that you're then disappointed with what they've written, because either somebody writes 5 pages of increasingly stupid nonsense, or somebody writes 5 lines and gets stuck. So if you give them the planning opportunity at the start, where you talk about it and share ideas and let them know that it's all right to maybe, I don't use the word steal, but if one of their classmates says a good word or an interesting phrase, I always say, well, you've got copyright in that. If somebody else wants to use that and twist it into their own shape or form, that's fine, because the best writers steal ideas and make them their own. So as much discussion as you can get at the start with the children, whether you're writing a narrative piece, or whether it's a recount or a report about something, it doesn't matter the genre of writing. If you talk at the start and get their heads full of ideas and get sort of keywords on the board and give them the stimulus to get them going, that's really important. And then you set them off to write. But even at that point, I wouldn't set them off to write and then expect them after 40 minutes to stop and have produced something. I would stop them after 15 minutes or so and then get people to read out their work and say, who'd like to share what they've written so far, and then discuss that with the class. What was good about that? what did they use that was good? Why was that good? What could be better about it? Has anyone said this in a different way? What have you said that's different? And let's compare them. So there's always that opportunity to talk about it and discuss it, and then and just share ideas. The whole process of writing, I think, should be shared. It shouldn't be something that you secrete away and somebody sits with their arm around a jotter and hides it and then produces a wonderful piece at the end. I think it's all about shared ideas and getting the children through things like sort of descriptive turns of phrases and stuff like that. That's what makes your writing different from the partner beside you. But the skeleton of it's got to be shared, I think. Sorry, I'm going off on that down the river there.
Great to hear that enthusiasm, and kind of move, just because there are other themes in the mix. We've got Miss Gourley, and I don't know if Miss Gourley wants to say a bit more, but she's put in the chat, there's no need for every piece of learner's handwritten work to be written as fair copy. The essential activity is the improvement of the writing, and it's perfectly acceptable to leave some writing in its workshop form. I thought that was an interesting point that draws on kind of what we're saying about tools for writing there. And I don't know if Miss Gourley, you want to come in at the back of that, or if anyone else.
Yeah, no, I think it's just kind of like what you were talking about earlier, how for some children that redrafting, it can be quite off-putting for them as well. And I suppose it's about them knowing if they are redrafting a piece, what is the purpose, what is the reason behind it, why are they doing it, what for, type of thing, and not every single piece of writing that they do has to be that perfect finished product, because like you were saying, it is a process, and that's part of the process.
Yeah, I would agree. I think on that diagram that we've got at the start, we've got that redrafting, celebrating success thing sitting quite separate in some ways. The point for it to come is obviously after feedback, but it doesn't need to. You know, you can go back to the start of the process again, go through it again, go into your next chunk. And as you, I like that description of it, or leaving it in its workshop form too. I think that's quite valuable. Yep, absolutely, totally agree.
And it's about what is the learning intention? The learning intention, well, it's at times the learning intention will totally be about the tools for writing, but not always. And the more complicated stuff is around about the ideas and adopting different aspects of genre and that the creative process. And it's really, really important to keep that foregrounded, I guess. I'm just seeing Miss McHenry, back to talking here. Miss McHenry saying talking as writing, especially in the lower school, is very beneficial. So why can't it be carried through the school? Our mantra is, if you can say it, you can write it. And then Miss Gourley again, totally agree. Let's hear them rehearse unfamiliar language structures too. I don't know if David, Nicola, you want to come in on either of those comments?
I just absolutely agree with that rehearsal of unfamiliar language, giving them those opportunities to discuss with peers and use the language structures, whether it's the discourse markers or the vocabulary that you're looking for them, that which will likely be unfamiliar. So it's giving them that opportunity to use it in discussion or in talking tasks for them then to get that internalize and then be able to write that in their task. So yeah, absolutely agree. Just lots and lots of opportunities for that talk.
Yeah, again, I would agree as well. And I think that it's, sometimes it's as much about lack of experience as it is about lack of depth and lack of content. And I think using those opportunities for discussion and dialogue can quite often plug that gap. I think it can actually go quite a long way to plugging that gap. And that's an equity gap as well. That's kids who maybe don't have those experiences or haven't had the same sort of opportunities, but they're getting the chance to tap into that. And we've got a reference to funds of knowledge somewhere back there on those slides, but it's getting the chance to tap into what other people might bring to the table so that you can include it in enriching your own work. There was another point made. I'm just going to see if I can track it down. I found it a wee second ago. Mrs. Beggins, the one about proofreading and checking over work. Helen or Nicola, I don't know if you want to take that one.
All I would say about that, where does proofreading or checking work fit in is the question from Mrs. Beggins, and what is the best way? And it's I think, comes back to, we were talking about planning, and some children, young people finding that planning bit irksome. And this is kind of another part of the process that maybe some also find irksome, but it's the other part of it is it's a skill, you know, and it's a muscle almost that we need to exercise and stretch. So it's even just having that routine of editing, and I suppose as we move through the stages in primary school and into secondary school, just making that very much becoming an automatic routine. So where it's maybe a little bit more supported, the beginning of second level and throughout second level, it is just a given at third level. It's an expectation at third level, because when you're in, when you move on to the senior phase, that's something you've got to take a bit of responsibility for to be successful. So we all hate looking, well, I can't speak for myself, I hate looking over my own writing, but then what I pull out of it and what I do and how I make it better, and showing it to my peers and how they make it better, I always benefit from that experience. So Nicola's practical example there, just coming back to that, is a really good way of kind of starting to build in the routine and allowing children and young people to see the point of that, I guess. And also just all of this, I think, comes back to purposeful and relevant context, and having a real, you know, everybody understanding why they're writing, gives you that full ownership of it, I guess.
I agree. I think that authentic audience is really important, and if children, young people know that someone else is reading it and going to try and make sense of it, then it gives them that understanding why they have to check over that it makes sense, that it's that opportunity to, before they share that writing with a peer or with their teacher or with a genuine, authentic audience, that's part of the process.
Yeah, I think it's valuable from a kind of a sense check perspective, isn't it? It's that idea that have what, you know, I was talking earlier on about tools for writing, and I was talking about communicating meaning at first reading, and I think that, you know, if it doesn't make sense to you and you're the person who's written it, then you probably want to have another wee look back at that. So yeah, I do also think though that there's things to be said as well for the way that technology is impacted upon editing and will continue to impact upon editing as we go forward. Kids are typing a lot more now, they're submitting a lot more work, using things like Glow, and they've got the chance to use spell checkers and grammar checkers and things like that. There is an element of it being done for them. In that sense, their errors are highlighted anyway. So I think they maybe are in the habit of doing it in that forum, but maybe not as a handwritten exercise, maybe not when it's words on a piece of paper that you've written. They're maybe not as instinctively going to change it as when they see all of those little blue and red squiggly lines on their Word document.
We've got a hand up, Mr. McAllister. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, it was a wee point about the I'm sorry, I'm throwing now. Someone came into the room there, sorry. Yeah, it's a point that when we look at kids writing, we're doing something that's really unfair to them, because we ask our learners to write something, and then we look at it and we analyse it and critique it and whatnot else. But in the real world, if you're a writer or anyone that writes for a local paper or whatever, what appears in print will never be the first thing they ever write. They'll have written it and they'll reread it and they'll have been embarrassed by what they wrote the first time round and changed it and put it into an order that they like. And then maybe they've got an editor who tells them to change it again and so on. So by the time something gets into print, it's maybe been written half a dozen times. So for children in your class who write the first thing and then you go through it and say, this is good, this is not so good, this is what you need to change. It's just worth bearing in mind as a teacher that that's the situation you're in, that they're not producing, they never will produce the best thing. And quite often what you're actually doing is setting them at a level based on maybe something they've only written once. That's the reality of things, and it's not fair, but that's just how it is. Just a point really, rather than anything else.
Yeah, it's a useful one. I think it's useful for young people to understand the process that we all go through, and even in our work situations. I mean, David and I took several goes at preparing this PowerPoint. You know, we collaborated together, and creating that community of writers where they're collaborating on a piece as well is part of real life working. So if you can give children those experiences in the classroom and that they understand that as part of a lot of people's working lives, then that's important. I think that range of different text types as well, those different purposes for writing, showing children where they might write in different contexts for different careers, that can be really helpful to make those real life links for writing for different purposes as well.
We've got an interesting one that I don't think we've got loads of time for, but I think it would be good to have a quick chat about it from Mr. Stevenson. I don't know if you want to unmute and just talk about that one, about BGE progression.
Oh yeah, it's probably something we're kind of working on just now, so it's on my mind, and I'm loving all the messages here about writing pedagogy and the writing process, and because we're kind of grappling with that just now. What does progression look like? What's the difference between third and fourth level? And I'm just wondering if, as well as kind of different writing goals and different types of model text, if you like, I'm wondering if things like how independently kids can go through these stages of the writing process and use these kind of editing strategies and planning strategies as maybe part of your thinking on what that progression might look like.
Michael, it absolutely is. That was the first thought that I had when I saw your comment, and that increasing independence. I think essentially, and it's coming back to what David said a little bit earlier on about, with certain purposes and types, it goes so far, and then it will look the same when you write in that genre text type when you're in fourth year to what it looked like when you were in primary 6, because it can't go any further. So it is that increasing complexity, things that we've already said, and I think you also said yourself around about borrowing, that skill of borrowing across text types is part of it for me also. And I mean, in a nutshell, it's always for me with literacy and English, we engage with and create increasingly complex texts, and I think that's what we have to kind of keep hold of. It's not that when you're in fourth level, you're doing an awful lot that's different, but it's in a more kind of complex way, I would suppose. Do others want to add?
Yeah, I think the independence is the key marker for me. I think it's that ability to take what you've learned and independently apply it, and not to quote or kind of misquote the document, but new and unfamiliar contexts is the key to that there. I think sometimes it's different for us, isn't it? Especially talking about secondary education and comparing us to other subjects who have that far more linear progression through CFE into senior phase, national qualifications. We don't have that, and I think it's okay to admit that. You can quite often see within the one piece of writing elements of second and third and fourth level, and that's fine. That you'll see that within a bit of writing. I think that's okay. In terms of progression in writing, I think they're striving towards that independence, especially if we're talking about third into fourth level. I think it's about taking what you've learned and taking what as a writer the teacher has taught you, and then independently taking it on that stage further. So that obviously creative writing, persuasive writing lend themselves more, personal writing, narrative, if you want to kind of combine the two, they lend themselves more easily to doing that, don't they? They're less rigid, there is more scope, there's more headroom within those sorts of tasks that are associated with creative personal writing and with persuasive writing. So yeah, I would in a nutshell, I would probably agree with what's been said already. Independence is probably the hallmark of moving into fourth level.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much for answering that, guys. Take the time, that's dead useful. Cheers.
I'm just conscious of time. Is there anything else that you want to kind of pick up on in the chat before we kind of round off?
There's one last one there I'm seeing from Ms. Elder, and we could maybe just talk very quickly about that, because it's quite an interesting question. Do children choose their own subject purpose and format for writing? In my experience in primary, the teacher mostly chooses. I don't know if you want to say a bit more about what you're asking there.
Yeah, it's one of the outcomes, Helen. It's one of the things. I enjoy creating texts of my choice, and I regularly select subject, purpose, format and resources to suit the needs of my audience, and that's at first level, and at first and second level. And to be honest, I don't think I ever achieved that. As that wasn't an outcome that really meant anything to me as a teacher in primary. I don't know if other people would agree with that. should we be trying to do that more, or I don't know, maybe at third and fourth level it's more relevant?
I think there is scope for children to write about their own interests, and using visual prompts, for example. They can all be given the same visual prompt, but they decide what they're going to write about that. So that's given them a choice element. It's about what choice are we giving them. So I gave an example earlier around persuasive writing. So they might, you might set the type of writing, but then they choose how the format of that writing. So it might be a letter, or it might be an advert, or it might be a poster, but it still has that element of persuasive writing in it. So it's around what choice. They might not choose everything, and you might limit the choice, but they've still got some choice within it. So I think it's around giving children different opportunities for choice within the writing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would agree, Nicola.
Yeah.
I think that kind of independence of choice, I guess, is something that we see more of in secondary, and we do more of in secondary. But I don't think that's necessarily a conscious decision or something that happens as a result of that level. I think it's just down to how the work is framed. And I think when I was working in a kind of transition role, I noticed that quite a lot of the writing was topic based, that had a context, and that really kind of drove the content of the writing. It drove the topic of the writing. I think, as Nicola said, there's a good opportunity within that to maybe, freedom to choose a stance within a discursive topic, or freedom to take a side within a persuasive topic. And I think that's where that independence lies. I guess the only thing I would maybe be mindful of, and it maybe comes back to what I talked about with tools for writing not being the solely independent aspect of the writing that kids are producing. I think it just depends. It's about how much content they're given within that same topic that everyone's doing. And I think I would always be wary that they may all write about the same subject, but they independently come up with what they're going to say about that subject.
I think that's a great answer from all of you. Thanks. Yeah, I like the idea of having free writing one day a week or even more, but yeah, that would be good. And following, I see Angela says following play, writing about things that they're doing. So I would love to see children choosing to write as an option. Thanks.
There's some ideas about free writing in the resources that we're about to take you through. So
yeah. So just kind of, again, conscious of time and kind of ready to round off. Just a couple of hints in terms of, I've done a wee bit of work and a wee bit of reading into funds of knowledge, and kids being able to tap into resources associated with home and community. So there's a paper there if anyone's interested in doing a little bit more around about that. And the other one, again, Nicola and I put these together so she can maybe speak a little bit more to the James Clement stuff that's there as well. But the other, just before I kind of round off, I would mention, and it's not a resource as such, but maybe just a kind of mindset, and it's mostly associated with reading, but I think it's really quite relevant for writing too. And it's that different perspectives about literacy in those three domains, and just kind of remembering that writing as well as reading, it's not just about servicing that cognitive knowledge and skills domain. There's also got to be value placed upon the cultural capital that kids bring to a piece, their own identity that they bring to a piece as well. And that's what when I'm talking about values-based assessment, when I'm talking about asset-based assessment, it's about considering those other two domains as well as the cognitive knowledge and skills that they may deploy within the piece.
Just going back to the two texts there from James Clement's, really helpful. And actually, I kind of stole and adapted his editing station, so I can't take that as completely my own idea, but just adapted those ideas from James Clement's as well. So just showing how to put that into practical. And David Devout is an excellent book there around making the implicit explicit on all aspects of literacy, particularly for secondary colleagues. So that's another useful one. And then we have some, the next slide is really around the resources that are available within Education Scotland. We've got a couple of the Education Endowment Foundation's reports there, which are really full of really valuable information and approaches for literacy, improving literacy, and then just some practical ideas. So Scottish Book Trust have got, you know, some competitions, etc., for young people that can really inspire writing. We've got the free Writing Friday resource from the National Literacy Trust, and Beyond Words, which was a project with the National Literacy Trust and BUPA, and they worked with some authors around inspiring young people to write. So loads of ideas there too. And then finally,
yeah, just to round off with it. I mean, I know that's only an hour. It's obviously a massive topic. It's very difficult to drill down as much as you would like into pretty much any aspect of this, but we hope that we kind of managed to, given in response to what's out there just now, and there are a lot of really good things out there just now, but what we wanted to do was maybe just fill in some of the blanks around pedagogy that they throw up, and maybe answer some questions that people will have either just now or further down the line with regards to things like text types, and do I need to keep doing recount all the way into second, and do I need to keep doing it in third, things like that. You know your own, practitioners know their classes, they know what's needed there. There is no magic bullet, there's no one approach to teaching writing that's going to cover everything. But if anyone does have any further questions, myself, Nicola's emails and Twitter handles are there. Please get in touch. More than happy to kind of ping ideas back and forth with you about it.
And finally, just a reminder about the evaluation form, which is already in the chat, if you wouldn't mind spending a few minutes just completing that as well.